Andrew, do you remember the promise you made to me on our wedding night? You promised that no matter what happens, you would always treat me with love and kindness. You promised your heart would never change.
Madam, that was before I became who I am today. I am a billionaire now, Jane. I don't need you anymore. If you don't like how things are, the door is wide open. You can leave.
So be it.
Picture this, a man so poor that he couldn't afford a single meal a day for his family, a man who dropped out of school just to work on his parents' dying farm, a man who wore the same torn clothes for months because he had no money to buy new ones. This same man married a woman so stunningly beautiful that the entire village couldn't stop talking about her. And within just a few months of that marriage, this same poor, struggling farmer became a billionaire. He built mansions, he bought expensive cars, he moved his entire family to the city. People called it a miracle. Pastors said God had finally remembered him. But what nobody knew, not even Andrew himself, was that the woman sleeping beside him every single night, the woman cooking his meals, the woman who called him my husband, was not human. She was a ghost, a spirit walking in human flesh. And her mission? It could either be the greatest blessing a man could ever receive, or the most devastating curse that would destroy everything he ever loved. But here is the part that will shatter your heart into a million pieces. By the time Andrew realized the terrible mistake he had made, it was already too late. Watch this story until the very end, because what happened to Andrew and his family will change the way you treat the people who love you forever. Now, to truly understand how devastating this story becomes, you need to first understand where Andrew came from. And trust me, his beginning was nothing short of heartbreaking. Many years ago, in a small, forgotten village tucked away in the rural countryside, far from the noise of the city, far from electricity, good roads, or clean water, there lived a young man named Andrew. Andrew was born into a family that knew nothing but poverty. His father, Papa Ezekiel, was an old farmer whose back had been bent by decades of working under the scorching sun. His mother, Mama Grace, was a quiet, prayerful woman whose knees had grown weak from years of kneeling in prayer, begging God to change their situation. Andrew was the firstborn of 8 children. 8. Let that sink in for a moment. 8 mouths to feed, 8 bodies to clothe, 8 futures that depended on a family that could barely survive on what they had. The only thing Andrew's parents owned were a few pieces of farmland. These lands had been passed down from generation to generation and were used to grow cassava, yams, and a few cash crops like cocoa and palm produce. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. It was the thin thread that kept this family from complete starvation.
But here is the painful truth that nobody talked about. Papa Ezekiel and Mama Grace were getting old. Their bodies were failing them. Papa Ezekiel's hands trembled when he held his farming hoe. Mama Grace could barely walk to the stream to fetch water without stopping 3 or 4 times to catch her breath. The strength they once had was gone, and with it, their ability to provide for 8 children was slowly disappearing. Andrew saw this. He saw the pain in his father's eyes every evening when the old man returned from the farm with barely enough harvest to feed the family for a week. He saw his mother crying quietly in the corner of their mud house when she thought nobody was watching. He saw his younger siblings going to bed hungry, their stomachs growling like angry drums in the silence of the night. And something broke inside Andrew. He made a decision that would change the course of his life. Andrew, who was just finishing his primary education, walked up to his father one evening and said the words that no parent ever wants to hear from their child. "Papa, I will stop going to school. Let me join you on the farm." Papa Ezekiel looked at his firstborn son with eyes filled with tears. He wanted to say no. He wanted to tell Andrew to go back to school and chase his dreams. But the truth was, they needed help. They desperately needed help. And so, with a heavy heart and trembling lips, the old man simply nodded. From that day forward, Andrew became the backbone of his family. Every single morning, before the sun even thought about rising, Andrew was already on his feet. He would grab his cutlass, tie a piece of cloth around his waist, and head straight to the farm. He worked like a machine, clearing bushes, planting seeds, harvesting crops, carrying heavy baskets of yams and cassava on his head for miles just to sell them at the local market. But no matter how hard Andrew worked, it was never enough. The money from the farm could barely cover food for the family, let alone pay for his siblings' school fees or buy medicine when someone fell sick. Some nights, Andrew would sit alone under the moonlight, staring at the stars and asking himself one painful question: will my life ever change? But despite all the suffering, despite all the pain, Andrew held on to one thing that kept him going: hope. A small, stubborn flame of hope that burned deep inside his chest. He truly believed, that as long as he was alive, things would get better someday. Now, as the years passed, Andrew grew into a strong young man. He was hardworking, he was respectful, and despite his poverty, people in the village admired him for his character. But there was one thing Andrew had been avoiding for a very long time: marriage. His elderly parents had started pestering him. Every other day, Mama Grace would pull Andrew aside and say, "My son, when will you bring a wife home? I am getting old. I want to carry my grandchild before I close my eyes forever." Papa Ezekiel, even with his failing health, would sit Andrew down and lecture him. "A man your age should have a family. Marriage is a blessing, my son. It will open doors for you."
But Andrew would always shake his head and smile sadly. Marriage? How could he think about marriage when he could barely feed the mouths that were already depending on him? How could he bring a wife into this suffering? What would he offer her? A mud house with a leaking roof? Empty pots and hungry nights? Marriage was the absolute last thing on Andrew's mind. But at the same time, deep down in his heart, he carried a quiet guilt. He didn't want his aging parents to die without seeing their grandchildren. He didn't want them to close their eyes with that regret sitting heavy on their souls. And so Andrew found himself stuck between two impossible choices: marry and add another mouth to feed in a house that was already starving, or wait and risk his parents dying with an unfulfilled wish. But life had already made the decision for him, because what was about to happen next would shake Andrew's world to its very foundation. And it all began on one ordinary morning on a dusty path leading to the farm. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of morning where the air was cool and the birds sang louder than usual. Andrew had woken up early, as he always did, grabbed his cutlass, and began his long walk to the farm. The path to the farm was one Andrew had walked 1,000 times. He knew every tree, every stone, every bend in the road. There were no surprises on this path, or so he thought. But on this particular morning, as Andrew walked past the old mango tree near the village stream, something caught his eye. Something that made him stop dead in his tracks. Standing by the stream was a woman. But this was not just any woman. This woman had a beauty so strange, so captivating, so otherworldly that Andrew felt the air leave his lungs. Her skin glowed like polished bronze under the morning sun. Her eyes were deep and dark like the midnight sky, yet they sparkled with a light that seemed to come from somewhere beyond this world. Her hair fell over her shoulders like a dark waterfall, and when she moved, it was as if she was floating, not walking. Andrew had lived in this village his entire life. He knew every single face, every family, every man, woman, and child. But this woman? He had never seen her before, not once. She was not from his village. She was not from any neighboring village either. She was a complete and total stranger.
Andrew stood there, frozen, his cutlass hanging loosely in his hand, his mouth slightly open, his heart pounding so loud he was sure the entire village could hear it. "Who is this woman?" he whispered to him. Everything inside him was screaming to walk up to her, to say something, anything. But Andrew was a practical man. He was carrying the weight of 8 siblings and 2 aging parents on his shoulders. He didn't have time for distractions. He didn't have room in his life for feelings that wouldn't put food on the table. And so, with every ounce of willpower he had, Andrew tore his eyes away from the strange beauty, gripped his cutlass tighter, and continued walking to the farm. But here is the thing about destiny. You can try to run from it. You can try to ignore it. You can fight it with everything you have. But when destiny has made up its mind, there is nothing, absolutely nothing you can do to stop it. For the next several days, Andrew tried to forget about the woman by the stream. He threw himself into his farm work. He worked harder than ever. He distracted himself with chores and responsibilities. But every time he closed his eyes at night, her face appeared. Those eyes, that glow, that mysterious beauty that seemed to belong to another world entirely. "Forget about her," Andrew would tell himself firmly. "You have more important things to worry about." But then, exactly 11 days later, fate struck again. Andrew was returning from the market, carrying a small bag of provisions he had bought with the little money he earned from selling his cassava. And as he turned the corner near the village square, there she was again, the same woman, the same captivating beauty, standing under a tree, looking at the horizon as if she was waiting for someone or something. This time, Andrew couldn't fight it. Something deeper than willpower pulled him toward her. His legs moved on their own. His heart was beating so fast he could barely breathe. And before he knew it, he was standing right in front of her. Good afternoon," Andrew stammered, his voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. The woman turned and looked at him, and when her eyes met his, Andrew felt something he had never felt before in his entire life. It was like the whole world went silent, like time itself stopped moving. She smiled, a soft, gentle smile that could melt the hardest of hearts. "Good afternoon," she replied. Her voice was calm, smooth, like water flowing over polished stones. "My name is Andrew," he managed to say. "I'm Jane," she said simply. And just like that, with that one simple exchange of names, a connection was formed that would change Andrew's life in ways he could never have imagined. But what Andrew didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have known, was that Jane was not what she appeared to be. Jane had never been born. Jane had never lived. Jane had never drawn a single breath. Jane was a ghost, a spirit that had taken on a physical human body so perfect, so flawless, that no living person could ever tell the difference. And Jane had a mission as old as time itself. She was sent to walk among the living, to find a human soul, and depending on how that human treated her, she would either shower them with blessings beyond their wildest dreams, or bring upon them a curse so devastating that it would destroy everything they held dear. The question was, which one would it be for Andrew? But we will get to that. First, let me tell you how this simple meeting at the village square turned into a love story the entire village would never forget. After that first conversation, Andrew found himself drawn to Jane like a moth to a flame. He started visiting the village square more often, hoping to see her, and every time he did, they would talk for hours. Jane was unlike any woman Andrew had ever met. She was kind. She was wise. She spoke with a warmth that made Andrew feel like everything was going to be okay, like all his struggles, all his pain, all his sleepless nights were about to come to an end. Within weeks, Andrew gathered every ounce of courage he had and told Jane the truth. "Jane, I am a poor man. I have nothing to offer you. My house has a leaking roof. My family struggles to eat every day. I cannot promise you riches or comfort, but I can promise you my heart. I can promise you that I will love you and take care of you with everything I have, even if everything I have is not much." Jane looked at him with those deep, mysterious eyes and smiled. "Andrew," she said softly, "I don't need riches. I don't need mansions or fancy things. All I need is to be treated with love, with respect, with kindness. That is all I will ever ask of you." Andrew's eyes filled with tears. No one had ever spoken to him with such tenderness. In that moment, Andrew knew this was the woman he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. He rushed home that evening with a joy he had never felt before, stood before his aging parents and declared with pride, "Mama, Papa, I have found a wife." Mama Grace nearly fell off her stool. Papa Ezekiel dropped his walking stick. The entire household erupted in celebration. When Andrew brought Jane home to meet his family, the reaction was instant. Mama Grace whispered privately, "My son, where did you find this angel?" Papa Ezekiel stood up and hugged Jane warmly. "Welcome to our family, my daughter. You are the answer to our prayers." Andrew's younger siblings gathered around Jane like she was royalty. She was gentle with every one of them. Nobody suspected a thing. Now, here is where you need to pay very close attention. Before the wedding, there was one important tradition that had to be fulfilled. Jane was supposed to introduce Andrew to her own family, her parents, her relatives, her people. But how could she? Jane had no family, no relatives, no village. She was a ghost. She had no bloodline to trace, no parents to present, no ancestral home to visit. But Jane was clever, very clever. She found people, strangers from a distant village she had encountered during her time walking the earth. She convinced them to play the role of her family. On the day Andrew and his people traveled to meet Jane's family, everything went perfectly. The fake family welcomed Andrew warmly. They performed all the necessary customs, accepted the bride price, and blessed the union. Andrew's family left feeling satisfied and grateful. Nobody knew. Nobody even suspected. The deception was absolutely flawless. And so, on a bright Saturday morning, under the shade of the biggest iroko tree in the village, surrounded by friends, family, and well-wishers, Andrew and Jane were married. Drums were beaten, songs were sung, food and drink flowed. The entire village celebrated. That night, as they sat together in their small mud house as husband and wife for the very first time, Jane held Andrew's hand and whispered, "Andrew, my husband, I want you to promise me one thing." "Anything," Andrew replied. "Promise me that no matter what happens, no matter how much things change, you will always treat me with love and kindness. Promise me your heart will never change." Andrew looked into her eyes and said firmly, "I promise, Jane, I will never change. I will love you the same way today, tomorrow, and forever." Jane smiled, but deep within those mysterious eyes there was a flicker of something Andrew couldn't quite understand. Was it sadness? Was it fear? Or was it something else entirely? Whatever it was, Andrew ignored it, and that would turn out to be his greatest mistake. Within just a few weeks of the marriage, something extraordinary began to happen, something that left the entire village in absolute shock and disbelief. It started small. Andrew went to his farm one morning and discovered that his cassava had grown 3 times bigger than normal. His yam harvest was so abundant that he had to borrow baskets from neighbors just to carry it all home. His palm trees. A wealthy merchant from the city passed through the village and tasted Andrew's palm oil. He was so impressed that he offered Andrew a contract to supply palm oil to 3 major markets in the city. The money that came from that single contract was more than Andrew's entire family had earned in their whole lifetime combined. Andrew fell on his knees and wept. "God has finally remembered me," he cried. But it wasn't God. It was Jane. Every night while Andrew slept, Jane would sit quietly in the corner of the room, her eyes glowing faintly in the darkness, and she would whisper ancient words that no living ear was ever meant to hear. She was channeling blessings, prosperity, and abundance. She was using her supernatural powers to open doors that had been sealed shut for generations. She was turning the wheels of fortune in Andrew's favor, and she did it all out of love. Within 6 months, Andrew was no longer a village farmer. He was a wealthy man. He bought land in the city and built a mansion, a beautiful, sprawling mansion with tiled floors, running water, and electricity, things Andrew had never experienced in his entire life. He moved Jane to the city. He bought new clothes and a car. He opened a trading business that grew faster than anyone could explain. Contracts poured in from every direction. Business partners appeared out of nowhere. Everything Andrew touched turned to gold. People started calling him great names. Some even called him a billionaire because his wealth seemed to have no limit. His old parents cried tears of joy. Mama Grace raised her hands to heaven. Papa Ezekiel managed a proud smile and whispered, "My son, you have made me the happiest father alive." Andrew brought all 8 of his siblings to the city. He enrolled the younger ones in the best schools. He gave the older ones positions in his growing business empire. For the first time in their lives, the family knew what it felt like to eat 3 meals a day, to sleep on real beds, and to wear brand new clothes. It was paradise. It was everything Andrew had ever dreamed of and more. But here is where I need you to listen very, very carefully, because what happened next is the part that will make your blood boil, the part that will make you shake your head in disbelief, the part that will absolutely break your heart. Because wealth, when it enters the wrong heart, can turn an angel into a monster. And Andrew, sweet, hardworking, humble Andrew, was about to show the world a side of him that nobody knew existed. It started gradually, so gradually that if you weren't paying close attention, you would have missed it completely. First, Andrew stopped saying thank you to Jane. The man who once held her hand every night and whispered words of gratitude now walked past her without so much as a glance. Then he stopped eating her food. He would come home late at night smelling of expensive perfume and alcohol and tell Jane, "I already ate outside." He didn't care about the hours she spent preparing his favorite meals. He didn't notice the tears that quietly fell into the pot as she cooked alone in that big, empty kitchen. Then came the other women. Andrew, now wealthy and powerful, began attracting women from all over the city. Women who only saw his money, his cars, and his mansion, and Andrew, drunk on his own success, welcomed them openly. He would bring these women into the same house where Jane lived. He would flaunt them in front of her and mock Jane's simple village ways while his new companions laughed along. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was his siblings. Remember those same siblings Andrew brought from the village? The same ones who were once starving and barefoot? The same ones he rescued from poverty with the very wealth that Jane had blessed him with? They turned against her. They mocked her. They insulted her openly. They called her a witch because they couldn't understand how their brother had married a woman with no known family or background. They told Andrew he should send her away and marry a proper woman from a respected family. And Andrew, the man who had promised Jane that his heart would never change, listened to them. He began treating Jane like a servant in her own home. He made her sleep in the small room at the back of the house while he occupied the master bedroom with his latest girlfriend. He stopped giving her money. He stopped speaking to her. He acted as if she simply didn't exist. One evening, Jane stood before Andrew with tears streaming down her beautiful face. "Andrew," she whispered, "do you remember the promise you made to me on our wedding night?
You promised that no matter what happens, you would always treat me with love and kindness. You promised your heart would never change." Andrew looked at her coldly and said the words that would seal his fate forever. "That was before I became who I am today. I am a billionaire now, Jane. I don't need you anymore. If you don't like how things are, the door is wide open. You can leave." Jane stared at him for a long, long time. A single tear rolled down her cheek, and then she whispered something so quietly that Andrew
Leave.
barely heard it. Then so be it.
So be it.
That night, while the entire household slept, something terrifying happened. Andrew woke up at exactly 3 in the morning to a sound he had never heard before, a low humming, like 1,000 voices whispering at once. He opened his eyes and saw Jane standing at the foot of his bed, but she didn't look like Jane anymore. Her body was glowing. A faint blue-white light surrounded her like mist. Her eyes were no longer dark and beautiful. They were pure white, empty, otherworldly. And when she spoke, her voice echoed as if it was coming from the walls, the ceiling, the floor, and the air itself. "Andrew," she said, "I am not what you think I am. I was never human. I was never born. I never lived. I am a spirit sent to walk among the living. My mission was to find a soul and test it. If that soul showed me love, kindness, and gratitude, I would bless them with wealth and prosperity beyond measure. But if that soul turned wicked, if that soul became ungrateful and cruel, I would take back everything I gave and leave them worse than I found them." Andrew's entire body went ice cold. He couldn't move. He couldn't scream. He could only stare in absolute horror. "I loved you, Andrew," Jane continued, her glowing form flickering like a dying flame. "I loved you with everything I had. I made you rich. I lifted your family out of poverty. I opened doors for you that no human hand could open. And in return, you gave me pain. You gave me insults. You gave me cruelty." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice shattered like broken glass. "And so now, I take it all back." In an instant, the room plunged into total darkness. Andrew screamed. His siblings screamed. The entire household was thrown into chaos. When the lights returned, Jane was gone, vanished, as if she had never existed. But she didn't just take herself. She took everything. By morning, Andrew discovered the horrifying truth. His bank accounts were empty. Every single one. Zero balance. His business contracts were canceled overnight. His partners denied ever knowing him. His trading company collapsed. The mansion documents became invalid. The land was reclaimed by the government due to a mysterious error nobody— In the space of 24 hours, Andrew went from being one of the wealthiest men in the city to having absolutely nothing. Andrew stood in the middle of what used to be his mansion. The walls were still there, the furniture remained, but everything that had given it life, everything that had made it a home, was gone, including the woman who had made it all possible. His siblings gathered around him, their faces pale with fear and confusion. Nobody could explain what had happened. Nobody could understand how everything they possessed had vanished overnight. And then the news reached the village. When Papa Ezekiel heard what had happened to his son, when he learned that Andrew had lost everything because he had maltreated his own wife, the old man collapsed on the floor of his mud house. His body gave way. His left side went completely numb, a partial stroke. The same man who had smiled with pride just months ago was now lying on a mat, unable to move half his body, whispering Andrew's name over and over again. Mama Grace didn't collapse, but something inside her died that day. She stopped eating. She stopped talking. She stopped praying. She simply lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling with empty, lifeless eyes. She had truly believed their suffering was finally over. She had thanked God with every single breath she took. And now it was worse than before, because at least before they had hope. Now they had nothing, not even hope.
Andrew had no choice. With his head bowed low in shame and his heart crushed under the weight of his own foolishness, he packed what little he had left and returned to the village. His siblings followed behind him like a funeral procession. Nobody spoke, nobody looked at each other. The silence between them was louder than any scream could ever be. When they arrived at their old family home, the same mud house with the leaking roof, the same house Andrew had once escaped from with dreams of never returning, he stood at the doorway and broke down completely. He fell to his knees and wept like a child, not because of the money, not because of the mansions or the cars or the business empire. He wept because he finally understood the truth, the painful, devastating truth that had been staring him in the face all along. Jane had loved him, truly, deeply, unconditionally loved him. She had given him everything a man could ever ask for, and what did he do in return? He spat on her love, he trampled on her kindness, he threw her away like she was worthless, and now she was gone, gone forever, and she had taken everything with her, not out of hatred, not out of revenge, but as a lesson that Andrew would carry for the rest of his miserable life. The village that once celebrated Andrew's success now whispered about his downfall. People shook their heads, old friends turned away, and Andrew, poor, broken, humbled Andrew, had to start all over.
His father would never fully recover from that stroke. His mother would remain bedridden for months before slowly finding the strength to rise again. His siblings, who had tasted wealth and luxury, now struggled to readjust to poverty, their hearts heavy with bitterness and regret. And Andrew? Andrew would spend the rest of his days working on that same farm, walking that same dusty path, passing that same old mango tree near the stream where he had first laid eyes on Jane. And every single time he passed that spot, he would stop, he would stare at the water, and he would whisper the same words. "I'm sorry, Jane. I'm so sorry." But Jane never came back. She never would. And so, my dear viewers, this is the lesson that Andrew's tragic story leaves behind for every single one of us. Never let success change who you are. Never let wealth make you forget the people who stood by you when you had absolutely nothing. Because the honest truth is this: money can be given and money can be taken away. But the way you treat people, that stays with you forever. Andrew had everything a man could ever wish for: a loving wife, a family lifted from the dust of poverty, wealth beyond imagination, and he destroyed it all. Not because of enemies, not because of bad luck, not because of any force outside of himself, but because of his own pride, his ingratitude, and his cruelty. When the world gives you blessings, hold them gently. Treat the people who love you with kindness. Never forget where you came from, because the very moment you start to believe that you are bigger than the love that built you, that is the exact moment you begin to fall. Be humble, be grateful, be kind, because you never truly know the source of your blessings, and you never know what you might lose if you take them for granted. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to this channel for more powerful stories that will change the way you see the world. Drop a